Good morning. Today I wanted to share with you something. I've gotten a real good tune-up at this last Spirit Rock Teachers Retreat. Spirit Rock, offers a retreat for the teachers every year in September, and there is always a teacher invited to teach the teachers. And this year it was Anam Tupten, who is a Nyingma Dzogchen master who has a center in Richmond in the East Bay. And he's a very accomplished and kind teacher. He grew up, in Tibet when he was young as a child, without electricity in a very remote village with his grandparents. So he has some very traditional roots. But then he came to the West and is married with an American woman and has two daughters and has, very well integrated his teaching into the Western culture and is capable, to speak to a broad spectrum of people. And because of his insight and deep, he's a Rinpoche actually, but he doesn't use the title. Because of his deep insight, he has the capacity to really, pass that on in a very simple way. So he's capable of, bringing it really to the point. And so it was a great pleasure for all of us to be able to spend time with him. And, this morning I was thinking I'd like to just speak to a few of the main points which stood out for me at this teaching. And, in the Dzogchen tradition, they are called the pit instructions, or sometimes also pointing out instructions, where the teacher, uses particular sentences, to help the student to see the true nature of the mind. And that's done, in a guided meditation. How I often teach here as well, I just give a short introduction, then we go into a guided meditation. And I just try to pass on some of what I've learned from Anam Tupten. And I think the main points, he was speaking to was to remember from time to time not to follow our thoughts. So, from time to time when we are really caught up in thinking about something, to just for a moment say, don't follow your thought, to really say that like a mantra, and that gives a momentary opening. So that was one of the main things he said. And then the next thing he said, really paying attention to the gaps between the thoughts. So whenever there is a gap, to really pay attention to this gap, because this gap, this crack in the habitual river of thoughts, this gap is actually a glimpse of Nibbana, or a little Nibbana, how my first teacher Ajahn Buddhadasa called it. And the third point he said, always remember to ask yourself, what is the state of my mind right now? And try to help everyone, including ourselves. What is the state of my mind right now? And try to help everyone, including ourselves. So these 3 pit instructions he shared with us. And I think, if we gonna boil that down to one sentence which summarizes all of this, I'd say the sentence is, the main question would be, what is the difficulty here? And rather than thinking about it, really sensing into that in the body. Attuning ourselves to what's happening in the body. Most likely, it's some kind of a contraction if it is connected with greed or hatred or confusion. Is some kind of contraction in some area of the body, and to really sense into that. Not thinking about it, but directly experiencing it. And, as I've said several times, wisdom is personal experience understood. To really, stand under that personal experience, which means to really open up to the sensations in the body, rather than splitting off, the discomfort into the head and then thinking and thinking and thinking about it, what we usually do. But as soon as we catch ourselves, remember not to follow your thoughts and come back down into the body and sensing what is happening there. And, and then if through that kind of a practice, through the capacity to be with the discomfort, then, the light comes in through those cracks. And then we suddenly understand, oh, it's just another life experience. It's not my personal problem alone. It's just another life experience. And all of those experiences are impermanent and they are conditioned. And as soon as we have that access, then there is a moment of letting go. There's a gap, in the consistent hamster wheel, of the conditioned mind. There is a gap, and then there's another gap, and another gap. And there's also natural gaps, when the mind really doesn't hold on to a pattern, but most often it goes unnoticed. And the practice is about noticing those gaps, that they are occurring naturally. And at the same time also working on stepping out of the conditioned mind again and again, as soon as we remember it. And the word mindfulness, the root of the word mindfulness, or sati in the Pali language, is actually means to remember. To remember what's happening in the mind right now. And then letting go of that pattern for a moment at least. And, my teacher in England, Ajahn Sumedho, he always said, it's like this. It's like this. There's no need, to kind of argue and chew it over and go back to it again and again and again, but just seeing it for what it is. And, in the beginning, I always thought it's just too simple. I mean, how can that really be, a practice to just say it's like this? And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything about it. Sometimes, things need to be done, things need to be sorted out. If Heather wants to go to India, she needs to go and book a ticket, and pack her luggage and all of that, and make sure she has a passport. So there is things which need to be done. But if that doing, comes from an understanding that this is how the world works, this is how it is. If we are caught, in the world, and this is how it can be if we are not caught in it. But still, we need to respond. And there's a big difference, between reacting and responding. And the word responsibility, also comes from that same capacity to respond rather than react. Then if we are able to respond, we can take responsibility. Because there's a sense of space, around experience, and then we can choose to step forward. So I really found that very helpful, to have that pointed out again by Anam Thupten in such a simple but very deep way. And, really feeling our emotions and sensing what's going on in the body and allowing that to open us up into a bigger flow by seeing, this is impermanent, this is uncomfortable and unsatisfactory and empty of a self. It's that insight, which gets triggered if we allow ourselves to be opened up by our experience into a bigger view. And in the Dzogchen tradition, they always speak about the view. The view, seeing things in context, seeing the big picture, not being completely kind of lost, in what's going on. This is such a simple way, of summarizing what the practice is all about. And then, this morning I also looked into the Tao Te Ching, if there for one of the chapters, which speaks to that same thing also. And I want to share that with you. And it goes like this. When the master runs into a difficulty, she stops and gives herself to it. She doesn't cling to her own comfort. Thus, problems are no problem for her. She doesn't cling to her own comfort. Thus, problems are no problem for her. So then whatever happens, in life is a teaching for us, a teaching to help us grow individually and collectively. And that brings us again and again, to the current eco-cultural or eco-social crisis, where we are noticing that so many things are no longer really working very well. And the way, how we are conducting our lives are driving us to the brink of extinction if we don't wake up, if we don't really adjust to the truth. And I think the discomfort, which is connected with that realization is what drives so many people into distraction. And it's understandable, But this group here, on those Wednesdays, morning meetings, we really like to develop the resiliency to be able to really turn towards this. To, allow the discomfort to open us up. And to, build a community together, a community space which can hold that discomfort and uncertainty. Knowing, that this is the only way forward. We can't really, turn away from it and just hope that somebody else is going to take care of it, because it depends on the waking up of many individuals. There is no savior, man or God who is going to do it for us. We need to do it together. Society, the citizens of the world need to wake up and need to go out and press for change. And it has already had many good results, but it's not enough yet. We need to go further. We need to continue. And in order, to be able to access the right strategies, we need to be able to sense into those gaps, when the mind isn't caught in old patterning. That's, where creativity resides, in those gaps between the thoughts. This is where the light comes through the cracks. This is where the new solutions are emerging out. And we need spaces, collectively, where we can together do this work. Giving space for these new solutions to show themselves. And that's the work we can do in these online sessions together, to create a space where we can together learn this and build this resiliency together. And it doesn't mean, we have to work hard, but it means, to step out of these patterns of the mind, which tells us, it's too late, or we don't know what to do, or we need to wait for somebody else to do it, we are powerless, all of these different stories which come up from time to time. To step out of that. So just let's find a posture which is comfortable enough and alert enough to go deeper into the body. And, allowing the breath to take us in deeper. And really listening, with our full awareness, full mindfulness to what you find as you connect with your body. And if you notice, that the mind wanders off, just gently bring it back. And also noticing, the emotional state right now, what you're bringing with you. And the state of the mind. Feel stressed or relaxed. Just seeing what you're bringing and building the capacity to connect with what's happening in the moment. Because if we can connect, what's happening in the moment in our own bodies and minds, from there, then we can go deeper. Because our body and the planet are the same. But first we need to open up to our own experience, and then from there we can go deeper. Building this connective tissue. And allowing our nervous system to guide us. And sensing the gravity, which is gently pulling us towards the soil, the planet, showing us, where we belong at this time when we are reincarnated here as human beings on the planet. That's where the work lies. We can't go somewhere else because this body needs to be here. It needs to be nourished, it needs to drink, needs to breathe. It's completely dependent on the biosphere. And that's our working situation for now. We need to come to terms with that And, looking after the way we conduct ourselves inside of that biosphere is part of the teaching. It's part of what we need to look at. As the biosphere is reflecting back to us in no uncertain ways that something is not quite adding up anymore. So it's a reckoning, for our species as we are finding ourselves, on a threshold. We could call it an evolutionary threshold. And we know about it. It has emerged into consciousness over the last 20 years or so, that more and more people start to connect with that truth. It has emerged into the mainstream, and by today it's about 60% of the American population knows about this. So it's more than half of the population. There's lots of organizations and non-profits and politicians working on this. As we waking up to the fact that we need to change our whole infrastructure. And also our laws need to be changed. It's a lot of work which is out there in order to adjust to this new self-understanding, that we are not separate. It's like a maturing, a growing up. And it happens through being with the discomfort of what becomes conscious. In the beginning, it's very, very uncomfortable and scary. And then if we stay with it, and if we support each other to stay with it, if we co-regulate, it becomes more and more integrated because our minds open up, our hearts open up, and there's an adjusting going on. And this is how the path unfolds. Allowing more life into our mind or into our hearts, allowing more world, don't having to shut it out, and try to put the lid on and then feel scared, feel anxious, because energetically the body knows there's something which is knocking on the door and we need to let it in. It, shows us old traumatic bubbles, which are still stored in our bodies and haven't been transformed yet. But this is why this work can be very challenging, but if we start it, it can be done. Just, one bite at a time, one step at a time, not all at once. That doesn't work. Is it that constant asking, as Anam Thupten said, what is the state of my mind, of my heart right now? And how can I help everyone, including myself? And then, allowing the space to come in through the cracks between the thoughts. The little nibbanas. That creativity beyond the intellect. Where we can make space, in our own hearts and minds for that to emerge. As it has happened since, life started to be here on this planet. The constant flow of change, and the change emerged when the old gives way to the new, like a flower blossoming. Nature knows how to do that. We just need to attune to it, and we have the equipment to do so. The body and the mind, the heart, they can resonate. They can choose to do this work by stepping out of the repetition compulsion, which often, has a traumatic underpinning. It needs to be gently freed. As our ancestors have been doing this, otherwise we wouldn't be here today. So it's much more, like taking our seat in this long, long lineage of ancestors and doing our little bit. For all of those who come after us. That really is very, very helpful, changing the perception to something much more real and natural. We are not alone in this. Seeing our lives in a much bigger context. That's what we have lost, in this culture of hyper-individualism, which has hit the wall now. It can't go on like this. It doesn't lead anywhere. because it's not true. And as we are, changing our perception about our lives and our lot, so to say, and become more aware of the long lineage, of ancestors we are embedded in. Not only human ancestors, but also animal ancestors, plant ancestors, mineral ancestors, the whole evolutionary trajectory of this planet. And there's also, which has emerged out of the universe. Then, it takes on a very different tenor. And, cultivating that capacity to sense this interconnectedness, this non-separation, rather than desperately, trying to find meaning for our individual existence. That is what we need to pay attention now on this threshold. And development goes always like in, it's like a pendulum. There was a time when it was the right thing, to really go into the individual and empower the individual. And now the time comes again where we need to swing back and see the embeddedness into the collective, not only human, but also in the biosphere. Because we can't continue to destroy our environment, because it's going to kill us. So that's what we are now working on as a species, to recognize that need and to cultivate it, familiarize ourselves with the truth, because we have neglected it for a few hundred years, as we were getting to know each other, or getting to know ourselves. And such growth, is often connected with a lot of discomfort, yeah. And we can use that sensing of the discomfort as a means, to open us up rather than to shut us down. By asking ourselves, what's going on in this moment in me? What's the state of my mind? What am I bringing to the moment? And then from there, sensing into the body. And connecting, with the data flow, which is happening in the body, as the body is part of the planet, of the biosphere, which is a much vaster intelligence than the human intelligence. Which is always, only about me and everything referring back to me. And just, allowing that to be informed by something bigger. Rather than trying to desperately find a meaning for our individual existence, seeing, how we can open up to this much vaster context. And then play our little role inside of that context. Which will emerge, from this opening up. Being, recruited by this vaster intelligence. And just also noticing how that feels in the heart if we understand ourselves as part of something much, much vaster than ourselves. Really resting into this. Because, we can also call that the Dharma. Dharma means nature. It's one of the words how can be translated. And the Dharma wants to be realized. It's not hiding, It's just the distraction through all of those habitual thought patterns. That is what is between the heart and the Dhamma. And it can be transformed. Those emotional and cognitive filters, they can be thinned out, as we are practicing, as we are allowing the discomfort to open us up rather than shut us down further. Because first, it feels intuitively that a contraction, that a shutting down is going to protect us. And, as small infants, that was the right thing to do. But now we are ready, to allow those filters to dissolve by sensing the contraction and allowing it to liquefy, allowing it to melt, by feeling and sensing what has not been felt and sensed earlier because we weren't ready. And that's why we are doing it together, because it's easier together. And stepping out of that habitual thought of uncomfortable is wrong and comfortable is right. That's something, which is very deeply wired and quite unconscious. That is a big obstacle, which we need to become conscious of. The equation of uncomfortable is wrong and comfortable is right. That's not true. That's at the root of consumer capitalism. And it is not working. Remembering through how many extremely uncomfortable situations, the evolution of life had to go through to come to this point. Great, great challenges. The first animals who came on land from the water and had to develop digits and limbs, to start moving on land. That must have been so scary and uncomfortable, but it happened. If it wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't be here today. There's so many ways, to respond to challenges. So many life forms have developed who have developed different responses. In order to grow and live and contribute. All of our oxygen comes from plants. We couldn't be here without them. All our building materials, lots of our food. We are so deeply, deeply interconnected with all life forms on this planet. And that's, our working ground for developing, increasing wisdom and compassion. to wake up and to grow up. Both needs to happen. Then we soon coming, to the end of the sitting, and we can invite the blessings of all of our ancestors, their wisdom, to come into this space. Encouragement, for us to also become good ancestors. And, allowing a measure of that discomfort as a contribution, so that future generations may have a decent place to live and to grow themselves, just as we have this opportunity. Just as Anam Tupten said, what's going on in my mind right now, my heart mind, and how can I help? And then really see, what comes forth from that aspiration. What is your bit? Because it's different for everyone. But we can all support each other to develop the courage and the strength to ask the question. To ask the question with support of a teaching, which is coming to us from Iron Age India. And, with all of our ancestors behind us on a biosphere, which is developing for almost 4 billion years. There's a lot we have going. We just need to open to it.